everybody, and welcome to a new season of Frank About Health. This particular season is special in the following way. It is also serving as my first ever Voices of Disruption campaign. Let me be more specific what I mean by campaign. We are seeing a crisis in our country that has been magnetized over the last 9 days. That's a government shutdown. That's point one. Point two, all of us who are familiar with Obamacare or familiar with Medicare and Medicaid or have group insurance or have regular individual health insurance, which I actually think doesn't get offered as frequently as it used to about 10 years ago, are facing double or sometimes triple the premiums, higher deductibles, higher copays, unaffordability to keep your policy if it's a choice between that and actually eating or paying rent or paying any kind of lifestyle needs like transportation, or better yet, what if you're unemployed and you're now no longer going to qualify because you have a work requirement that the big beautiful bill that became law on July 4th, 2025 is actually getting ready, as Phyllis Quinlan had indicated on Frank About Health, to be a nightmare in the beginning of 2026. Now, I'm dedicating this particular episode with my special guest, Anshar Seraphim, because he is an example who has faced, he's been on the show a couple weeks ago, and he has faced disruption in his life, but he mastered it. He manifested it into something that, in my view, is a brilliance, a gift, an art form that he is able to function within our increasingly limited society, but at a level in my lifetime that I have not seen on most people who have been living with the spectrum. Now, I live with epilepsy, and I thought, okay, great. I am now neurodivergent, as Anshar is as well. But I've always believed that when you are dealing with a stigma, that does more of the damage than actually the condition itself. But Anshar has proven to rise not just above any stigma, but above the limitations that he was probably believing to have, especially in his younger years. Therefore, he is the kickoff guest for this campaign, which means that my 12 guests on this campaign will be targeted disruptors, people who have solutions to the problems that we are all going to be facing collectively as a nation in January. But simultaneously, for anyone going through such limitations now, I will have solutions. One such person everyone must remember is Marshall Runge. That's his actual pronunciation, the author of The Great Healthcare Disruption. Although this was written when we were not faced with governmental disruption, it was all medical and also about things that were very productive: mRNA vaccines, artificial intelligence for healthcare, dealing with genome testing, all of the things that we all need. But as you'll hear from Anshar throughout the show, there'll be discussions of research funding being cut, cures for cancer being in question, not to mention some of the other disruptions that have been going on in both of our lives and what we are at risk of seeing in the near future. So I guess I've just also given you all my disclaimer. I am providing the facts. And if you don't like them, this show is not for you. All right. However, I am saying to those, my loyal listeners and viewers who've been watching me for over 4 years now, that if you really want to get the insight, not just on this show, but in the next 11 weeks afterwards, of what I, along with my team of professional colleagues that I have aligned with, are going to come up with a product solution in the near future, but more on that throughout the season. And that being said, I want to first introduce Anshar Seraphim, who is a advocate for the neurodivergent community. He has also spoken at the United Nations, and he has done a lot of work for both talkradio.nyc as well as for other individuals who are in need of direction using his skill set, especially in the area of neurodivergence. So that's a plug, by the way, Anshar, for Ask Anshar 5.0, unless you're at 6.0 and I just don't know it yet.
Thanks for having me back, Frank. It's a lot of fun.
Same here, same here. So by all means, why don't you expand upon your background, if I left out anything?
Well, my journey started with me being 75% or so nonverbal with autism. Um, but I came from that generation before we really, it came into the forefront. Most people who knew about autism and didn't have it directly in their lives or family members, would reference things like Rain Man.
Yes.
It's not really something that I mean, the diagnosis for even Asperger's didn't come out until like 2 years before I graduated high school. So I kind of missed a generation of because the average age of diagnosis now is 4 years old.
Right.
So to think of how different my life would have been if I would have received my diagnosis 15 years earlier,
Right.
which goes to show just how much things can change. Um,
Yes.
I remember I was talking with Marlo Thomas over at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and just the level of treatment for like acute lymphoblastic leukemia and for a lot of the things that they're treating has just dramatically changed. We're talking about differences like going from a 5% survival rate to a 95% survival rate. Um,
Amazing.
and the older treatments would cause horrible side effects, be crippling. I mean, they would survive, right? If they survive the treatment, then they would be able to thrive, and be able to overcome the disease. But some of them are left with. I even got to meet and speak with a few of them. Of course, they
Hmm.
were still incredibly grateful, because they got to be part of that cutting edge research that not only
Yes.
saved other people's lives, but it saved their life too. They just had to have some more disadvantages with it, and I related a lot to that.
Right.
When I got to my 20s, because I found out that I had autism in the Navy. Um, I had free health care with the military, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, but um, that was how I ended up finding out um, that I had a developmental disability. And in fairness, there were tons of signs, but it's very difficult when there are so many symptoms are not only variegated for different people on the spectrum, but also
Hmm.
can be mistaken for a lot of different things. And I did have a lot of the developmental problems that went along with it. When one of my eyes was turned all the way in, a really severe strabismus, I had to have it corrected with surgery.
Mm.
Um, Lots of other, coterminous or comorbid medical conditions that can go along with autism. But it's important, in me wanting to advocate for neurodivergent people, that I do point to the fact that people on the spectrum do have a really wide range of different support needs.
Right.
And I'm blessed enough that maybe I was on that tipping point of being nonverbal and able to push myself, but there are a lot of people who don't have that option. And
Right.
you know depending on how you look at the statistics, and statistics are a funny thing, so you have to
Hmm.
take that with a grain of salt, but I think it's a fairly solid statistic. 85% of autistic adults are unemployed, just because of the fact that there's a lot of different disenfranchising things that can happen, and a lot of people will mistake your symptoms for character traits too, which is really
Right.
frustrating. So
Yes. And I can identify that with epilepsy. When I first came to talkradio.nyc, I say this all the time. I was dealing with the stigma and just trying to erase it. That was my focus. But little did I realize that I was just trying to say, hey, my voice does count. I do exist. And of course, this platform has expanded beyond that. And now I have guests like yourself, or even people who have solutions that are rarely heard or taken seriously for whatever the perceptual reason is. It's just people need to own their health care and get clarity and truth. And that is unfortunate that, along with the other disruptions that are going on, a lot of just people making perceptual judgments is not allowing for the truth to come out in as frank of a way as I would like. So that being said, the title of this episode is Voices of Disruption, and it is my Voices of Disruption campaign. So that being said, have you found in your development and redevelopment, I should say, that you found yourself best to enhance your life by making sure you were associating with truth tellers? You mentioned Marlo Thomas. So have you been able to speak to others that had helped you along your journey?
yeah, you find a lot of inspiration, and sometimes in funny places. I think that there's a lot of merit, because I've been really blessed in my life. Not only did I have an opportunity to overcome adversity, but I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things, and one of them was like visiting the actual facilities at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and getting to partner up with ALSAC, with
Yes.
Lebanese charities, and we got to present checks to them. Over the course of the campaign I was doing with K Jewelers with them, we'd raised like $40 million for them. doing everything from the plush to doing outright donations, building a cafeteria for them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're right on the cutting edge because they've got technology that would just blow your mind that they're doing amazing things with. They have a particle accelerator there that's just for being able to help facilitate care for pediatric cancers. They have I got to speak with a Japanese engineer and researcher who was developing the equipment because their newest wing was there for being treatment.
Yeah.
They had proton beam therapy, um, which is kind of like it's like targeted radiation therapy, except what happens is the energy passes harmlessly through the body unless it essentially touches another perpendicular beam. And if it does, then that area where they intersect is what becomes irradiated. So if you can basically, sedate the child, and you have to time it very carefully with their breathing and their, the respiration, circulatory system, all of that, but you're able to target and do like deep brain tissue. It's like radiation therapy, but anywhere inside of your body without having to affect all of the tissue around it. Um, and just things like that, innovations like that. I got to speak to their head genetics researcher. St.
Yes.
Jude was really foundational in developing chimeric antigen receptor, uh, a CAR T therapy. That's the idea of using like a viral capsid to deliver uh, genetic information to help reprogram the human genome with we have genetic precursors, and what's really cool with that is not just that primary modus of treating pediatric cancer, but just like NASA when we went off and started to explore space, and we got so many incredible inventions and innovations that we weren't expecting from pursuing that. It's been the
Right.
same thing, during their mapping of the human genome project. um, when they were looking for one thing, they would end up finding another. They ended up finding like two different cures for blindness and deafness that were genetically related, or at least we're able to isolate, the genetic components of that. And that's one of the cool things about experimentation and exploration. And some of that is, I feel, died in the modern era. Science is kind of moving to a for-profit industry,
Mm.
which is really scary. It's a scary
Yes.
thing. It's not
Yes.
just medicine. It's science, it's education, it's technology, and
STEM.
when
Yep.
you when you try to incentivize that kind of thing with capitalism, it can create some really evil trends. I mean, a pharmaceutical company, for example, can make a whole lot more money out of treating an illness than they can by curing it. We have
Yeah.
to take a look at the social contract and start asking some hard questions. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to do that today.
Yes, because we're about to take our first break, but I mean it's very interesting. I think, when I look at the Great Healthcare Disruption title, this meaning changes every month. I know when I first started talking with Marshall Runge, I have to get used to calling him that. Um, he basically was just talking about all the newness that we were going to be seeing, especially with the rise of artificial intelligence, which I know you can relate to, especially in looking at your neurodivergent portal. But this now has taken on the meaning rather, of the other way around. We're disrupting progress because of capital needs or narcissistic privilege or whatever might be perceived in the public eye. All right, we'll actually get into that in the second section. So, ladies and gentlemen, please continue to watch this episode of Frank About Health on talkradio.nyc and on our social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. We'll be back in a few.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Okay, Anshar, help me understand that even though it is clear, we need to tell my audience, or visually or audio wise, depending on how they're receiving this show, that the awareness of healthcare disruption is very important now at this time. However, three fundamental gaps are recurring, especially towards the year end. One is the cuts in research funding. Another is the perception that people have of the neurodivergent community, because you mentioned earlier, people can judge it as a character trait rather than really looking deeply into the person and respecting their difference. And then there was something that you were talking about in terms of microplastics. I think you and I spoke offline about that.
Oh
Is
yeah.
that even related, or is that just a
I
separate
mean,
topic
it's
altogether?
tangentially related. I mean, we can certainly talk
Okay.
about that. I think
Okay.
it's important to discuss whichever side of the political fence you're on, some of the implications of this big beautiful bill.
Yeah.
Everything from having national work requirements, which can really harm people who have disabilities that are trying to not live off the system and are trying to contribute, but maybe they can't work 80 hours a month. Maybe their way
Right.
of doing that is different, or maybe they have to um, do work that is much more staggered as far as time is concerned in order to be able to do it with their challenges. And I think that trying to punish people for and take away their health care and their support from them trying to put in effort so that they're not freeloading off of the system. Because
Right.
many of us, I can speak for myself, but I mean, if, it would not be a difficult thing for me to go. Say I wasn't able to get my driver's license till I was almost 40 because of my sensory issues.
Right.
Um, there's all kinds of challenges. Transportation is a huge challenge when you have autism. So the notion of punishing people who could be on disability but choose not to, that's just strange. And then to go into, I think there's independent project synopses that are talking about $1 trillion in federal health program cuts with like 12 million people fewer insured over a decade,
Yep.
heavily concentrated in Medicaid.
Yep.
And, the ACA marketplace coverage is way less affordable um, as those subsidies unwind and premium tax credit rules change. Several, you know, uh, premium spikes are going to happen. We're going to have coverage loss. There's going to be uh, states having to move their budgetary dollars just to blunt the impact of it.
Yep.
And with growing up, but it's going to be over $200 billion more on uncompensated care over the next 10 years. With like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, and that's going to be shouldered by the hospitals and the physicians that are trying to help. That's $63 billion for hospitals and 24 billion for physicians. I think that talking about the fact that the government is supposed to exist so that the things that people are not self-motivated to do,
Mm-hmm.
that those things are taken care of for the society. It's an important thing to talk about
Right.
because whether you want to take the position that one kind of care or support or another is a form of, socialism or something. I don't think anyone thinks of socialism when they take out their library card.
Correct.
You know, there are important benefits and equity that needs to happen when we're trying to get equal protection and
Mhm.
to pull apart some of that underpinning. I know that there is a desire to take things away from people that are freeloading, and that's valid, right?
Yes.
I think the thing that people don't understand in this bipartisan landscape that we have is that when you try to take all of the viewpoints and turn them into an all or nothing machine,
Mm-hmm.
you just create two groups of people that are pointing at one another, and then they're not able to meet in the middle and have the discourse that's necessary to talk about the things that they do need to compromise on.
Correct.
And that there has to be some gray area. And when everything is polarized into black and white, it it doesn't really help. This
No.
this whole concept of eroding care out of and I mean, you look at it like what, like England, the UK,
Mm-hmm.
in the wake of World War II, they were able to come up with their national healthcare system.
Yep.
And it has its flaws, just like every other country's, program, any programmer system has its flaws. But there is a social contract there. And when you put capitalism into a system that's supposed to provide care for people, when you live in a country where getting an illness by no fault of your own, or getting hit by a drunk driver, or getting a bad diagnosis can
Mm-hmm.
literally bankrupt you and send you into the poorhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Having a burst appendix can happen to anyone. Have
Yep.
Have you seen the costs of an appendectomy lately? You know,
It's probably what, 50,000 or more?
yeah, it's like the opposite of winning the lottery. It's a really crazy idea that something that could happen to any one of us at almost any age could literally bankrupt us, destroy our credit, all of that,
Yep.
simply because we've tried to monetize healthcare in the way that we have. And it just creates a lot of really hard effects. And I don't think that in the wake of us having a pandemic, that that should be the social signal that we need less money
Right.
in care, especially when we're spending so much more money on military spending than most other countries all combined, most of which are our allies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand the sense in all of it, but there's a secondary effect, and I wanted to talk about that with you because I think it
Sure.
really matters.
Sure.
And it's that the way that we're thinking academically and scientifically is starting to change too. We had
Yeah.
we've had generations now of people who came up through school just trying to get the piece of paper and get out because school is so expensive now, and
Yeah.
they're all given multiple choice exams, and what part of the country they live in and what county or district depends. The school budget's dependent on that, and
Mm-hmm.
none of that makes any sense because and this is one of the things I talked about when I wrote the white paper on education for the octopus movement when we were doing the think tank, because we all had to put our ideas together, and I'm the one that was synthesizing them.
Yep.
um this notion of budgets for education and gerrymandering all of these districts and saying, oh well, you live in this zip code, so you get less resources, and it it costs your government so much more money for you not to be educated. It
Mm-hmm.
literally is you're more reliant on the system. You have higher rates of incarceration. You're on more public service programs. You contribute less to GDP. I mean, these aren't opinions, these are facts.
Right.
So that the cost of education is not spending the money.
Mm-hmm.
um so to pull things away from things in the public trust, like education and healthcare, which we've developed this colored idea of from capitalizing healthcare in this country, um, we need to meet more in the middle on that and realize that it doesn't matter what your political position is when
Mm-hmm.
anyone can have a health problem and have it cost them, $100,000. It just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make any sense. It's nonsensical, but it affects research science too. And that was one of the things I wanted to touch on. And I know
Yeah.
that we'll get to it.
Well, I mean, but it's kind of sad where everything you've just outlined is literally how it's been shaping or reshaping, especially since July 4th. But the thing is that we are in a bicameral legislature, two-party system. The independents, which there are many of, who caucus with either side depending on their political motivation of during election season, is one aspect of things. But when it comes to your health care, which is ubiquitous, everyone needs health care. Even if they're physically healthy and they just want to get their annual physical, that makes you think that to be independent means to own outright your financial needs, your medical needs, the right specialist, the right hospital system. And we are not living in the type of system that allows you to self advocate. And that's why most people are just blindsided by the fact that, okay, all these changes are occurring, but that means you need to default to your own inner resources. And most people just don't know how to do it. So how would you qualify that? I mean, I think, well, better yet, before you answer that question, the way I've qualified it is being an epileptic individual 40 years or more at this point. I've always had to be self aware so that I know, am I having a seizure? Am I having an aura? Am I not having a good day that I get hit by a car and not even know it? So that just made me learn to be hyper vigilant about anyone's behavior towards me because I didn't know if it was triggering me or if it was actual real threat. So by nature, the way I do my work, the way I manage my budgets is I'm always thinking healthcare first. That, believe it or not, seems to be the predominant mode of thinking we all have to engage in at this point, especially with the uncertainty in 2026. Would you, and to therefore to the question, would you classify that as being an independent thinker, or is it something in response to defending yourself against what looks like to be a consolidation of social support?
Well, I think the reality that we all have to agree on is that when, for better or for worse, these two political parties
Right.
have risen to primacy. And the problem with that is that it doesn't make for a free election.
No.
Because if you've got one person gaming the system and everyone else doesn't game the system, it's the only way to make it equal. So the second that you don't have, other political parties that are doing, because when you run a caucus, you're basically saying, we're going to focus and concentrate all of our votes and band together so that we can just pick one candidate instead of going by individuals and the issues and all of that. We're going to all rally behind a single person so that they have the best chance of
Mm-hmm.
winning. So you're kind of holding a pre-election. You're
Right.
circumventing the election system.
Yeah.
That's why we haven't had a viable third-party candidate since like the 70s. Um,
Yeah.
is Well, I
Correct.
mean, it's been since 1970s when one of them got like 5% of the vote. So, obviously, with it being in the way that it is now for 50 years, we have to accept the fact that um, we're going to be divided on party lines. It's just the way that it is now. But if
Which,
that's the case,
yeah.
we've got to acknowledge moving into this generation of social media and AI
Yes.
that we're moving more and more to this idea of finger pointing and us and them. And, a person whose ideas you do not agree with, who you think is a reprehensible person, that
Mm-hmm.
person could still have an amazing insight on something that could change your life. People don't exist in shades of black and white. Um,
Correct.
and that having the inability to discuss ideas, most people would never believe this, but I'm actually conservative. I'm a conservative libertarian.
Hmm.
Um, so, but it's about the issues. Have a discussion about the issues. Oh, you got an opinion about the death penalty. Okay. Whether or not we agree on whether or not a person can do something that warrants um, someone dying for it,
Mm-hmm.
that's an ethical discussion that we could have. But if you and I can both acknowledge, let's say we're on opposite sides of that issue, if
Right.
we can both acknowledge that mistakes happen in the legal system all the time, that there are people that literally spend 20, 30 years in prison and then are later vindicated with DNA evidence, that there's literally a project to try and liberate people who have been falsely incarcerated, that
Mm-hmm.
issues like mistaken identity or fabricated evidence. There were forensic scientists who criminologically in labs were fabricating evidence. That if that can happen, then that means that it is possible for an innocent person to be found guilty of a crime. And
Correct.
in a
Correct.
system where an innocent person can be found guilty of a crime, whether or not you and I agree on whether or not it's good to kill someone because of an offense that they've done, can we agree that killing an innocent person is wrong? Because if we have a system where mistakes happen and it's a punishment you can't take back, that we have to be able to have that conversation. And if
Yes.
you and I are so polarized by the fact that we have different opinions about the first part that we can't even talk about the second part, then discourse dies.
That being said, this is the perfect segue. I was about to make two announcements related to what you said, but I think we're already over the time. So I will make those announcements when we come back to the third segment, because one of them you already know, and that is the documentary. And the other is just in general what I've been alluding to in terms of this campaign. So we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.
Misalignment within your sales team or with the client stalls deals and creates unnecessary friction for you and the client, resulting in up to 37% lower win rate. If you're in pre-sales, sales, sales management, or sales enablement, and you'd like to increase revenues, win rate, margins, client satisfaction, and stay competitive, this show is for you. Hi, I'm Art Fromm, host of the Making Seamless Sales Show. Please join me live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the Nonprofit Sector Connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. I'm glad I had Anshar on this show to kick off this campaign because he said it like it is. We are living in polarized time. We have a government shutdown right now. Guess what? During the open enrollment period for your renewal of Medicare or Obamacare or whatever kind of care you're getting from your employer. Gee, I guess we can't apply this year. I wonder why. Maybe I'll take what I have and watch the premiums double. Yes, that is a sarcastic response, but I'm saying it like it is. That being said, I want everyone to go into my YouTube channel and look at Being Frank for a Healthy Future. That is the documentary that I worked with Hilton Hotels a year ago, thanks to Emily Schulman and Jessica Serwin. I apologize. I just basically am pointing out that that was at a time when we were looking at growth in healthcare support and advocacy, especially with that hotel chain. And after Election Day, they pulled the plug on the deal because they didn't believe in what our new president was going to advocate for. So I was disrupted by a cause not related to healthcare. And so I've turned it around for everyone who is watching this show right now and beyond, like during the next 11 weeks, to watch the documentary to see why I created Frank About Health, see the guests that have been on, see the clips that were done, even see the overview of Hilton Hotels, and understand that this is the ideal perspective that Anshar was alluding to, that we all work together as a community to help each other out and advocate for each other. And that is what, at this point, based on the polarized system we have to start within ourselves and lead that mission to all of our family, friends, and colleagues out, not depend on the government in, because if that's your mindset, you're in for a rude awakening. Now, that's one point I wanted to make, which is to watch that documentary, which is live now on YouTube. The second is going into what you and I have been talking about in terms of this campaign. The campaign is to have individual guests, whether they've been on the show before or maybe people that you know of that can really swing this message home before January 2026.
Oh, I got an amazing guest for you, actually. I'll talk to you after. I have a great idea for someone who might appear.
Wow, you've got me excited. So you know what? Save it for segment 4. but the thing is that all of the guests that come involved in this series, this 12 episode series, including yourself, obviously, are going to help build our own community going forward into the new year. We're going to be a default solution, at least in our local areas for starters, and hopefully even bigger as time moves on. And Hilton can be a part of it. They don't have to be the driver like they were going to be. But that being said, what I wanted to talk about with you, Anshar, is that in that vein of polarization, if we're taking things into our own hands, do you have an approach from your own neurological way of thinking as to how people can manifest their vision of what would be a collective healthcare process? Like almost like you're introducing a new project or a new product to a series of investors or students, even if you're in college making a presentation. What would be your way, your approach to be able to help individuals look at the craziness and make something out of it? That's what I'm trying to bring out in this segment.
Well, I think the first thing that we have to talk about um, is how votes and political support work. You know, the idea
I'll just
that
issue one disclaimer out there. This is not a political show, but
no,
healthcare and politics are merging at this point. So be aware if you don't agree with the views, they are not the views of talkradio.nyc or of Frank About Health, but they are part of this conversation on disruption. Okay.
yeah, and good for the disclaimer.
Right.
Um,
Right.
there is a problem I feel
Okay.
where people vote their morality, and voting for your morality uh, can be a problem. And
Correct.
you
It's a
know,
bias.
I don't want to get into politics. I just want to point
Right.
something out, and
Sure.
that's that I think everyone can agree that drinking alcohol can be a bad thing.
Yes,
And
it can be.
you
Mhm.
know, if we all agree that it's a bad thing and that we don't approve of it, we could make the 18th Amendment. But
Right.
the question has to be when we're making laws and policy to serve the society,
Hmm.
whether or not making something illegal actually helps the society or hurts it. Because when we did that and we had the 18, we had prohibition and we had gangsters with Tommy guns because they didn't have an ability to go to an authority figure when a dispute arose. We had a dangerous product. People were making moonshine in their basements and burning their houses down and making a poisonous product that was killing people. Um, you had speakeasies and because when you make something a crime, you make criminals,
Hmm.
and that should serve as a 100-year-old example of why just voting for your morality doesn't make sense. You
Hmm.
have to think about what actually makes sense for a society where people exist in it that don't live their lives the way that you do and that you
Right.
don't agree with. And it,
Right.
it doesn't matter where your morality is at. If you agree, for example, that people are going to have a medical procedure that you don't agree with, and
Hmm.
you start to get into this place where you're like, well, I don't want my tax dollars to go to this person making this decision that I don't approve of. It's kind of like saying you're going to disown your kid if they're going to make a decision that you don't agree with.
Right.
Um, there's a problem with that attitude because it doesn't. If we all agree that we're in this society together, whether or not we agree on certain moral issues, and you want to pull away governmental support or legality for
Right.
those things just based on that position, that's not necessarily good for the society. And
No.
I think prohibition stands as an example of that. That even
Right.
something that we all can unilaterally agree can be a bad thing, can be an even worse thing to make illegal or to change the way that we support it as far as laws are concerned. So it should enter us into the discussion of whether we're liberal or conservative or whatever,
Right.
what significance it has on a society when we change the law and we change support for things. And
Right.
we have to be able to have conversations about that impact. And
Yes.
if we can't, if you ever talk to someone and you ask them the question, well, what evidence would you have to hear to change your mind?
Hmm.
Whatever the position is, if they can't give you an answer, then it's not an idea, it's a belief.
Correct. But it's also safe to say that the way things have been redesigned this past year is that you could be given the facts and still led not to believe in them.
Well, and that's the problem is that we have to look at the evidence. right? You have to look at the evidence of the quality of care that people are getting. You have to look at the evidence of the social contract of whether or not the laws and policies that we're putting into place are helping or harming people.
Right.
Whether they single out the people that you do or don't like or not. Um, and I think that we have to be able to make space for one another. And one of the problems is that we're moving into this society of echo chambers. That
Yes.
on the internet, it is so easy to just hit the little red X button, and then you don't have to listen to that person's opinion anymore. And it's
Mm-hmm.
killed discourse. And I think if anyone wants a life lesson, listen to a talk radio show that's like 50, 60, 70 years old, and you'll hear people from all over the political spectrum, different jobs, different walks of life, and they will sit down and discuss ideas. Oh, I don't agree with that, but I do agree with this. And I can't support that position, but I do like that. I do like your point of view on this. That it's possible for you to take different stances on different issues with people that you have other fundamental disagreements with. And when we've moved into this new age of whether or not we find one thing about a person reprehensible and we cancel them, and we do that to people and ignore them, and basically continue this party line all the way down through all rational discussion,
Right.
we're not able to serve the public trust that way. It just becomes a
Right.
tug of war. And we end up taking extreme positions to both ends to try to compensate for the extremes of the other position, and then it makes both sides wrong, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a real problem.
Absolutely. I mean, when you said a talk radio show, I know you didn't mean talkradio.nyc because I think
No, no, I'm talking about 50, 70-year-old radio shows where they were having discussions about really important issues.
so that
And
was like what 1010 wins, or was that another radio show
we're
that
talking
actually is
no,
still
we're
on the
talking
air?
about radio shows back in the 1950s, 1960s.
Are they available on Sirius XM or
Oh,
YouTube
you
or
can
somewhere?
you can pull them up on YouTube. You can watch those shows anytime that you want.
Okay. What
Those are
would
the
be one or two
old days
shows
of
that you could
radio.
recommend?
Peter Lorre and yeah. Anyway,
Okay.
you're missing out if you don't know who Peter Lorre is.
No,
Um,
no, I heard
but
it.
yeah, that's the problem, and that has creeped into academia and into science as well. And when we have this educational system that we do, where we
Hmm.
churn people out, and we're charging them this ridiculous amount of money to get degrees,
Hmm.
um, and we're measuring all of them with multiple choice questions, we're creating an idea of academic and intellectual development that's centered around money for a problem, for one.
Right.
Um, but the other problem is it becomes very difficult to get research grants. It becomes very difficult for important research to happen. And that's one of the reasons I put an open call for research on my LinkedIn profile. I gave the entire experimental paradigm, methodology, the results, why it's important, um, because there's new research coming out about tetrahydrobiopterin, BH4, and there's
What is that?
BH4 is the enzymatic cofactor that governs dopamine. It governs dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine synthesis, all things that are very, very important with neurodivergence, like autism,
Mm.
ADHD, and then DRD4 is a genetic part of a genetic polymorphism for dopamine production as well. And the dynamics between those two, they end up being confounding variables to one another. It's one of the things that possibly could be one of the reasons that we're having the neuroplastic changes that we are with developmental disabilities like autism.
Yes.
We're so busy arguing about whether this or that causes autism, and selling people with ADHD on giving them amphetamine salts and all these other kinds of treatments because we make so much money off of it, that
Hmm.
we've stopped looking for the actual causal factors with solid scientific research. And
Incredible.
that's going into a lot of different domains. It's possible right now. This is one of the other protocols that I had devised, to be evaluated by the scientific community, to be
Hmm.
able to take gut bacteria from animals, herd grazers, and because basically when you're in a biome, all the material in that biome is constantly recycled through the digestive tract of animals. So
Right.
if you can get the common gut bacteria inside of animals to be able to break down microplastics, then you can literally use the digestive tract of all of the animals that are on the planet to make microplastics go away and to not end up, in human organs. But is there money in it? Right? Is that a great way to make money? No. So how is that research going to be funded if we're starting to move academia and scientific development and advancement into this direction where everything has to be profitable? How do we serve the public good? I think that there are some really important questions that we have to ask about supporting science, supporting exploration, supporting new ideas, supporting creativity, supporting disruptive voices in healthcare, because the way that we're going to advance is not by doing things exactly the way that we've done them before. And we're getting more and more into these siloed methods of thinking that everyone just lives in states of right and wrong and whether or not something's profitable, and it's not going to take us into any positive place as a society when it comes to things that foster the public good, is really my point.
And it's eloquent. I mean, that's devoting segment 4 to the future of this show, especially during the next 11 weeks, because, you already know, you and I together will actually predetermine who are the guests that make sense, not to mention some of the returning guests, because, I couldn't have gotten to this stage of Frank About Health without people like you, as well as people like Marshall Runge, and not to mention Phyllis Quinlan and some other people that we will have coming back over the next season. But I'm interested to know who that guest that you want to bring onto the show as well, and just remind everybody again about the documentary, because if anything, at this point, it's more of a retrospective of where I came from and what I'm trying to do going forward. But what we hopefully will unfold together in the next 12 weeks will be new and exciting for all of us in 2026. Okay, so everybody, stay tuned for the conclusion of this episode of Frank About Health, all about voices of disruption and the campaign that will ensue, right here on talkradio.nyc and on all of our socials. We'll be back in a few. On Frank About Health, we're not just talking healthcare. We're managing disruption and innovation. Over the last 4 years, I've taken you from epilepsy and COVID to mental health, caregiving, and now the front lines of healthcare transformation. Stay tuned for a healthier future as we bring on the innovators, professionals, storytellers, and advocates who show you how to own your healthcare every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a purpose-driven individual looking for deeper healing, clarity, and growth? Welcome to the Expansion Room, a transformative space for purpose-driven individuals. I'm Siobhan Larice, host, licensed therapist, and coach. Join me every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc, now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
So, hey, everybody, I'm back here to wrap up this particular episode, which is only the beginning. This is episode 1 of 12 for my Voices of Disruption campaign. I can tell you right now that the next 2 weeks of October will feature, and I don't know which order because I have to get them all booked. It will feature Marshall Runge, it'll feature Deepak Sani, and more than likely, I will either have Jose Dennis come back on nutrition, or I will even speak to Siobhan Larice. I will be bringing Phyllis Quinlan in on November, and I also am looking to bring back Jennifer Griggs, who said on the documentary Being Frank for a Healthy Future that I'm a badass. Well, I'm only taking that to the degree that I am trying to do my part to come up with a solution for the financial hardship that a lot of us, especially with chronic illness, are going to go through. She had indicated that with coming with forgiveness is dignity, and trying to preserve our dignity and being able to forgive what was done wrong to us accept the loss for what it was, a forgotten past, but more importantly, to take ownership of your path going forward with your lessons learned. So she's someone that I wouldn't call a disruptor per se, but someone who really gets to the core of what we all need to live and learn, mirroring and echoing a lot of what Anshar said in the last segment in terms of how we get these conversations going so we can all unite in the common good. But now, Anshar, I leave it up to you to tell me that the name of that guest that you think would be of value to the Voices of Disruption campaign and to Frank About Health. After you unmute.
His name is Dr. Tom Ingenio, and he has a doctorate in Chinese medicine.
All right,
But
so
he's a white guy,
acupuncture?
and
Okay.
his quest is to learn how ancient traditions of medicine can be rooted in actual empirical science and how they can benefit the modern world. Because our modern understanding of science has evolved from a lot of ancient precursors, and a lot of those ancient precursors had validity to them. Everything from us giving willow bark to people for pain. We've made a lot of advances into modern medicine as a result of studying ancient medicine, but that process, like so many others, has stopped. So I think that there's something there. you know I think that it is telling
Mm-hmm.
that we're living in a kind of willful ignorance in the
Yes.
West.
Yes.
We'll carry protest signs and protest the industrial factory that's pumping smoke up into the chimney, out of its chimney into the air,
Hmm.
but we'll do it while sipping Starbucks coffee cups that have hydrogenated palm oil in them. And
Mm.
it's crazy because they're literally burning down the Sumatran rainforest with Sumatran elephants and tigers and orangutans and all of that literally living in the forest alive, and we burn it to the ground with them in it. And they've changed all the laws in Sumatra so that they can do that to be able to support U.S. Interests in palm oil, and we put it into all kinds of products. It's all over our shelves, and the human body can't break it down as fast as it does something like butter.
Mm.
And there's a reason that it gives so much shelf life to everything, because it's not that much different molecularly from plastic. It literally will hydrogenate it and boil it at super high temperatures with aluminum, and it's semi-solid at room temperature, and then they use that as a shortening, vegetable shortening, um, and
Mm.
it builds up inside of our circulatory system, and it causes heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And what are the three major actuarial causes of death in the United States? Heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And on top of that, burning down that Sumatran rainforest has a larger impact on on the environment than the entire industrial complex of the United States
Mm.
put together. And yet, we'll be sipping that cup of Starbucks that's made with that stuff while protesting the chimney that's in front of us, because the chimney that's in front of us is in front of us. And we like our Starbucks. So there has to be a point
Mm-hmm.
at which sanity enters this equation.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what side of the political fence you're on. We've got to be able to discuss ideas. We've got to be able to question the way that we've always done things. When I was doing that paper with education, with the movement, with the octopus movement, um, there was this feeling in educators where they can't change the system.
Mm.
And oh well, but we're making the do with what we have. We got these budgets, and we have to do these test standards, and yet when COVID happened, we
Mm.
snapped our fingers
Yeah.
and we changed the entire educational system to adapt.
As
So
soon as your own mortality is faced, that's when everybody bands together.
the idea that we would think that a temporary pandemic is enough of an emergency that we can snap our fingers and change the system, but 54% of Americans reading at a sixth grade level is not an emergency where we need to snap our fingers and do something different. This is the kind of cognitive dissonance that we're living in now, when we live in a
Yes.
polarized society that is not thinking about the public investment of the good, that you need to make space for people that you don't agree with. And I would encourage people to ask themselves that question. What is it that would change my mind? Whatever your position is, what would change my mind? What evidence would I have to see? Even if it's something ridiculous, oh, they'd have to prove it causes cancer or something, then it would change my mind. Well, okay, that's fine, but at least your mind can be changed. Because if your mind can't be changed, irrespective of whatever data you're given, you're a dangerous person at the voting ballot. And that's something that we've really got to talk about as a society. We've got to start practicing having difficult conversations with people that we don't agree with, so that we can reason with one another. Because if we lose that ability, and then we've been stuck in a bipartisan society for 50 years, there's only one place that can lead. So find the people that you disagree with and have a conversation with them. Find common things that you have in common. Find positions that you need to talk about, and be willing to set down the spear and hold the pen. If you can't do that with people you don't agree with, then how are we going to be able to make policy without revolution to be able to serve the community? And until that happens, the only thing that we can do is try to come up with a way to be able to financially compensate for what's going on in healthcare, and what we're all going to do about the fact that our taxes are going up, 73% if you make less than $40,000 a year. And at the same time, our money is losing value from inflation. And at the same time, the amount of payment that we're going to have to do, the amount of support for healthcare is going to go down. What are we going to do about this crisis? And if we don't find a way to be able to support healthcare, that is a terrifying prospect.
Correct. And at least you and I both know that there's something in the works that we can definitely, hopefully, anchor down a support mechanism going forward. But from the perspective that you also indicated about having people who you disagree with, is that your take on the type of guests that should be on this Voices of Disruption campaign going forward?
Yeah,
I mean, it'd be a mix and match.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's people like Dr. Tom. It's people who are willing to go against the status quo, ask hard questions, be willing to be wrong, be like, hey, I'm trying to bring 2,000, 3,000-year-old medicine into the modern world. Some of those ideas are going to be based on nonsense or spiritual beliefs or God knows what, and some of it is going to have crazy, implications for modern science. Is there a person who's willing to be wrong to be able to find out what's right? That's what science is. It's being willing to be falsifiable. And in a society where we exist in states of right and wrong, we've got to support research science that can be wrong and isn't going to generate a profit. And we have to have a different attitude if we want to make that happen.
Well, that being said, we're about to end the show. Anshar, thank you again for giving your depth and breadth of thought and reasoning and insight into what we're going to be doing here on Frank About Health for the next 11 weeks after this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, if you remember, Vicky Mizell was on my season finale a couple weeks ago, and she said that I was in the middle of a movement. Well, yes and no, but it became more so of a movement when the government shut down on the 1st of October. So you will be seeing that movement and my potential solution over the next 11 weeks. Please stay tuned to Frank About Health during that time frame. I want to get more participation from my viewing audience. So then one way I ask all of you to at least get history on this show, if you haven't even seen it until today, please look at the YouTube channel, search on Google if you can't find it. It is my own personal YouTube channel where I am housing the documentary Being Frank for a Healthy Future. And even though it had its day in the eyes of Hilton, it now has a day in the eyes of yourself. Therefore, that being said, I will continue to be frank about health, especially the next 12 weeks, as we get ready for a new financial methodology that is being inflicted upon us, and hopefully our own independent rebuttal that Anshar alluded to. Thank you again, Anshar. Thank you, Jesse, behind the scenes. Thank you to Sam Leibowitz, always, for all of your support. And I do owe you an email to describe what is going on, because I think it is something that talkradio.nyc will also benefit from. All right. That all being said, see you all next week. All right. Thanks again. Bye-bye. Bye, Anshar.